Hello and welcome to the next video for our class. This is the next to the last required reading text for the semester, and it is Everyday Use, a short story written by Alice Walker. And one of the things I want to bring to our attention right at the beginning of this text is connected to something we'll be thinking about for our final paper, and that is the subject of sources. In everyday use, we have a story that's written in what's called first person point of view. The narrator is the main character, and it is the character who goes by the name of Mama. And so one of the things you need to ask yourself as you're reading, especially the first part of this story, is what kind of source is Mama? Everything that she tells us before Dee, her daughter, arrives, will we find that everything Mama has said is not true? Will we find that Mama has lied intentionally or unintentionally? Will we find that she has told the truth and is therefore a reliable source? And the reason I bring this up is because in your final paper, as you work on an argumentative research paper, you need to vet your sources carefully. Try to find as reliable a source as you can, and whether it's a source that you agree with or a source that you disagree with. And I go back to the piece we read before this called What is Happiness? There, John Ciardi starts off by suggesting happiness might not even exist. It's not that Ciardi thinks happiness doesn't exist, but he brings in a reliable source by the name of Jonathan Swift and says, hey, someone like Jonathan Swift doesn't think that happiness exists. And of course, it helps us to know a little bit more about Jonathan Swift, but for the sake of argument, Swift is a reliable source. And if he says happiness doesn't exist, we need to give that some consideration. We shouldn't just dismiss it offhand. And of course, Ciardi will move past Swift's claim and say, as an American, Americans don't think like the Irishman Jonathan Swift thinks, but then Ciardi still has to go on and make his argument for what happiness is. And he will bring in other reliable sources to help him do that. So again, reading everyday use, keep in mind the source, and as you're preparing for your final paper, keep in mind the sources that you're going to be using. And with that, we get right into everyday use. It's good to be thinking, what is something you use every day? What are the things you don't use every day? Because something is used every day, does that mean it has no value? Does it mean it has the highest value? But if it's an object that we're using every day, what's the likelihood of it falling into disrepair or being worn out? Is that something that can be replaced? So for example, if you're using toothpaste every day, eventually it's going to run out. You better restock that supply. What we're going to see as we get through this text that there's a specific item that becomes of utmost concern in this text. It will be a literal object, but it will also be a symbol for something. It will be a metaphysical representation of something else. So then if that physical object were to go away, what does that mean for the thing that it represents? Okay, so we go to the text now. When it begins, we have that great opening line. I will wait for her in the yard that Maggie and I made so clean and wavy yesterday afternoon. A yard like this is more comfortable than most people know. It is not just a yard, it is like an extended living room. So in the opening line, we have the narrator, we have Maggie. We don't know who the her is yet. If you've read the text already, and we'll just jump to them, it is Dee. Dee is the narrator's daughter and is Maggie's sister. So we have at the very beginning of this story, we have the triangle that's highly effective. This is a love triangle, even though it's not one of romantic love. It is one of phileo, family love, brotherly love, and I would argue it's one also that involves agapeo love, sacrificial love, the highest kind. And what I want to ask you to be thinking about is, does Mama love her daughters? What in the text will support the answer to that question? So we have here the three characters. Mama says, I'm waiting for her. The idea of waiting, there's this idea of authority, right? And Maggie is there with me, and this is the yard that we take care of. And we also see that Mama has an ability to think in figurative terms, metaphorical terms. My yard is like an extension of the living room. The living room is where people gather. It's where we live, and a yard can be like that as well. From there we move on and we see what Mama says about Maggie. The fact that Maggie is nervous. The fact that Maggie has burn scars on her hands. The fact that Maggie is uncomfortable with Dee coming and will be uncomfortable until Dee leaves, which then begs the question, why is Maggie going to be uncomfortable because of that? We can say, well, the burn scars on her hands, and if anyone have any kind of physical problems with us, it's an understandable reason to want to back up and go, I don't feel very comfortable around people, especially if they don't have the same issue. But we move on. We come to find out that Mama has these dreams, and in these dreams, she's on a talk show, and she is reunited with Dee. And the reunion is a beautiful, a happy reunion. And Mama is also a very beautiful, quick-witted woman. And she comes out of that dream and tells us that's not what it's like at all, though. In the bottom of the first page, she talks about how in real life, I am a large, big-boned woman with manly hands, and I do manly type of work. I can butcher an animal. I can have it up in the freezer by the end of the night. And so she describes herself in a way that is very, very masculine, very strong. And she is a physical presence. When Mama walks into the room, she is going to draw people's attention. Not necessarily for her beauty, but she will still draw their attention. Maggie, on the other hand, might also draw people's attention. Of course, we see that Maggie is very bashful and shy. But when we move on, and we find out that Maggie thinks the world has never told Dee no. And it's worth stopping and thinking there for a minute. If we were the type of person to whom the world could never say no, we might accomplish quite a few things. It might also create a great deal of problems. What type of person goes through life refusing to be told no? Pretty difficult person, I think. Dee shows up, and Mama makes Maggie stay in the yard with her, right? Rather than just letting Maggie go off and hide, Mama has Maggie stay here with her. And I think this is an example of Mama showing tough love. Even though Maggie has burn scars, Mama is not going to let Maggie be inhospitable to her older sister. Also, even though Maggie has burn scars and is of a smaller physical stature, Mama expects Maggie to help her in the yard and do things around the house. We discover, however, just before Dee arrives, that Dee, as she grew up, hated Maggie. And there's some other things that Mama says in the text that seem to indicate that Dee also hated the house. When Mama describes the house burning down and Maggie being caught in the fire and Mama rescuing Maggie from the fire, and when they come to the tree where Dee is standing, Dee doesn't ask if Mama is okay. Dee doesn't ask if Maggie is okay. She doesn't thank God that they're alive. She stands there and watches the house burn in a way that would seem to indicate that Dee probably had a hand in setting the house on fire, and if not having a hand in setting the house on fire, was hoping that the house would burn. And maybe something a little worse than that, hoping that Maggie would burn with it. Again, that is not what Mama comes out and says in the text. I encourage you to go look at the text itself, but the claims, the thoughts I just brought up are still grounded in the text. but I'm also making clear to you what the text is saying and then what I am implying or reading between the lines there. Whenever you write, whenever you start to quote a source, you need to make very clear to your readers, here's what my source says, here's what that source means, and then if you are going to add an interpretation where there's going to be some room for argument, you need to make it clear to your audience, here's where I am weighing in with my angle, with my thoughts, and there might be some room here for disagreement. But if we learn that Dee hated the house and hated Maggie and hated Mama, then it begs the question, why is Dee coming home? What is she returning for? Has she had a change of heart? Has she come to tear the house down? What does she come for? When she arrives, we find out something, a huge revelation, and that is that Dee has changed her name. She has changed her name to Wangaru Liwanika Kamanjo. And this is, I believe it's a Ugandan name or perhaps a Kenyan name, but Wangaru means the person of stories or the place of stories. If you were to go home today and greet your parents and let them know that you have changed your name, it's worth thinking, how would that go over? You better have a pretty good reason for wanting to change your name, and even then, your parents might hesitate, your family might hesitate, especially if the name you were given is a name that came from a family member, and if that name came from another family member and could be traced back several generations, family names. But of course, we find out that's the reason Dee wanted to change her name. She was going to bring up the issue of oppression. She's going to bring up the issue, imply the issue of American slavery. I don't want to be named after people that oppress me. And Mama doesn't look at it that though. Mom looks at it as, you were named after your aunt, and your aunt was named after her mom, and your aunt's mom was named after her mom. Dee wants to take the conversation farther back, but Mom is not interested. And of course, Mom will make the claim, I didn't live back then, right, in the time of the American Civil War, so why should I be really concerned with that? Something really fascinating happened here. Dee has a subject she wants to talk about, a subject worth talking about. You probably have things you want to talk about with certain people. Of course, we always have to bring up the question of what is the appropriate time. In my 102 classes, we read MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, and he discusses this issue of time. When is the right time? When is the best time to bring up a thing? And there are appropriate times and best times to do things. And then in other situations, given the subject of what's being discussed and maybe the person it's being discussed with, there might not ever be an ideal time. But this is a big subject for Dee to just introduce the family with, right, on her first return home. So it's a great scene to go and read more closely on yourself, but you'll find that Mama adjusts and tries to learn Dee's new name, and Dee will even back off a little bit and say, I know the name is strange, you don't have to use it if you want. But we see some hospitality on Mama's end. Also notice too, when Dee shows up, these pictures she's taking of the house, the very house she said she hated. Why is she doing that? And then we get to the halfway point of the story, and the family is sitting down and they're eating dinner together. So far things are going pretty well. We can sense some of the tension that's beneath the text. We sit down, we're eating, and then Dee starts to make a big deal about all these handmade things that she did not like when she was a child. And of course, this can happen sometimes. When we're young, we don't have an appreciation for certain things, and as we age, we start to mature, and we start to see, hey, I should have admired that more. I should have made it known how much I respected that. But notice that Dee doesn't come when she comes home. She never says, I know I was rough to deal with in our lifestyle. We also have a really hard life, but Mom, you were there. You provided for us as best as you can, and I was rude or disinterested or dismissive or even hateful to you, and I've had a change of heart on that. I want to come back and say I'm sorry, and Dee doesn't do any of that. Dee just shows up as if how she's behaving now is how it has always been. And as she moves through the house, she starts to point out certain handmade things, only to discover that Maggie knows the family history. Mama knows the family history, but Maggie does too. This is now something that Dee does not have. And rather than Dee thanking the women for that information, Dee will kind of give a backhanded compliment to Maggie. Then comes the moment when Dee goes into her mom's room and messes around in the foot locker of mom's bed and comes out with these two quilts. And Dee asks for the quilts. And we know in the text, Maggie, who is in the kitchen washing dishes, slams a dish, slams the door, and leaves the house. This is pretty fascinating here, right? Dee wants to make a big deal about the family heritage, and yet she's not the one in the kitchen washing dishes. Doesn't mean that if you're the guest at your own home or someone's home that you need to be washing the dishes and volunteering, but there's no indication in the text that Dee even stops to do that. But once she asks for the quilts and we see that Maggie has a dramatic response, go back and look at the scene that will happen between Mama and Dee. Mama comes out and says, rather than saying, no, you can't have those because I offered those to Dee as a wedding gift, Mama comes out with trying to do a little bit of compromise, right? Trying to be diplomatic with it. No, you don't want those. They're made by hand. They won't last very long. They were just made by me and Aunt Dicey when we were kids. Although Mama will reveal to us as a narrator just how significant the quilts were to them. Dee will push back with, no, I don't want these things that are made by machine and stitched. I want the things that are handmade. Mama reaches out to touch the quilts just because Mama has a moment of remembering just how valuable these quilts are to her, and Dee will pull the quilts back, Mama says, as if the quilts already belong to Dee. And when Mama finally says, the truth is, I promised these quilts to Maggie as a wedding gift, that's when Dee comes out and says, Maggie will be too backwards to use these. She'll use these quilts every day, and they'll probably be destroyed. Dee's got a decent point here, right? If you had something of value to your family and it was going to be entrusted to someone else in your family who probably would ruin it, whether through use or disuse, you might stand up and say something like, no, I need to be the one who's allowed to hold on to this item. Dee is very rude to Maggie. Maggie will show up and say that Dee can have the quilts. I can remember my family without the quilts. That's a bit of a jab on Maggie's part. Right? Dee needs all these objects to remember people, but I can remember them regardless. Mama had also said to Dee, even if Maggie wore the quilts out by using them every day, Maggie knows how to sew. She can sew more quilts, which is another shot at Dee. Dee does not know how to sew. She's highly educated. She's good with words. She seems to be financially successful far more than her mom and Maggie, and yet she doesn't have a connection to the family history like they do, and she doesn't have the certain skills that these women have. When Maggie says she will give up the quilts, Mama takes a moment and steps back. She looks at Maggie and really sees Maggie for what she is, someone who is accustomed to not getting what they want, someone who is submissive to the will of God. Mama will describe a spiritual experience like one she has at a church. She will pull Maggie to her, something she has never done, and she will take the quilts from Dee and give them to Maggie, something that Mama has never done. She has never told Dee no, and now she is telling her no. Maggie will be shocked, Dee will be offended, and Dee will leave, but not before she tells Maggie, you should do something with your life. There's really a great opportunity for us at this stage. And of course, this story is written, I think it's sometime in the 70s that this story is written. Dee has some valid points. She has some good things that she wants to discuss. Mama will note how beautiful Dee is, and Mama will not deride Dee for being a beautiful woman. Mama will even compliment the way that Dee dresses. Dee sounds as if she's being complimentary of these people in her life, and then when she doesn't get what she wants, and we're not talking about, I want to keep my child and you're taking my child away from me. We're talking about, I want these quilts for a good reason, but now I don't get these quilts, so I will respond to the human beings in my life in a way that's very dishonorable. So she'll elevate the quilts and the people that the quilts represent, which is not very good to the immediate people in her life. So go back and read the story again, and you'll see the things that Mama laid out for us at the beginning of the story. Mama proves to be a reliable source. Doesn't mean that Mama doesn't have areas that she needs to work and think and maybe can make an improvement on. Other writers have written about this story and noted that about both women here. But it's a beautiful story. I think it's masterfully written, and I do think that Mama loves both children. I think the evidence in the text is there. I think the fact that Mama expects Maggie to work and expects Maggie to be hospitable to her sister is evidence of love. I think that Mama wants to learn Dee's name is an evidence that she loves her, that she's friendly to Dee's, or at least hospitable to Dee's guest, is proof that Mama loves her daughter. And I think when Mama finally tells Dee no is further evidence that Mama does love both her daughters. Is it real love when we let one always get walked on when we have an opportunity to do something for them? Is it love when we only ever say yes and only ever give the other person what they want all the time? So be wrestling with these questions and thinking about them as you work towards that final paper, as you try to define and describe and maybe illustrate for us what love is. Thank you.